China is already working on building a large spacecraft that could be anywhere from 800 meters to 1 kilometer long. But is this idea even feasible? What would be the use of such a massive spacecraft? China is working on building a massive rocket, a project that is a part of a wider call for research proposals from the National Natural Science Foundation of China, which is a funding agency managed by the country's Ministry of Science and Technology. A research outline posted on the foundation's website describes such enormous spaceships as major strategic aerospace equipment for the future space resources, exploration to uncover the mysteries of the universe, and long-term living in orbit. China is leading the space race now with their new space station and their plans to build a new lunar base. So what is China up to? Can it beat Elon Musk and the USA? Well, keep watching till the end to find out a lot more. China's first satellite was launched into orbit way back in 1970, and it went through massive disruptions caused by the Cultural Revolution. The only other powers to have gone into space back then were the US, the Soviet Union, Japan, and France. In the past decade, China has launched more than 200 rockets, and they were already successful in sending an unmanned mission to the moon called the Chang'e 5 to collect and return rock samples. After this mission, China also discovered a new mineral that could power the nuclear fusion reactors of the future. China also planted a Chinese flag on the lunar surface, which was deliberately bigger than the US flags from the previous missions. With the launch of Shenzhou 14, China launched 14 astronauts into space compared to 340 by the US and more than 130 by the Soviet Union, the present-day Russia. About 300,000 people are now working on Chinese space projects, which is 18 times as many as the current workforce for NASA. The Chinese National Space Administration was set up way back in 2003 with an initial annual budget of 2 billion Chinese yuan, or about $300 million. In 2016, China opened its space industry to private companies, and they're now investing more than 10 billion Chinese yuan, or about $1.5 billion a year, according to several Chinese media outlets. China is already working on developing satellite technology for telecommunication, air traffic management, weather forecasting, and navigation. These satellites also have military purposes. Some would say that they build these satellites to spy rival powers and guide long-range missiles. China decided to turn the tables with the recently launched Tiangong space station, making them the first country to have their own space station in orbit. The country previously launched temporary trial space stations named the Tiangong 1 and Tiangong 2. The country is now working on a massive 800 meters tall rocket. The foundation conducted research into new lightweight design methods that could limit the amount of construction materials that will go into making this 800-meter rocket. The foundation is also exploring new techniques for safely assembling such massive structures in space. If funded rightly, the feasibility study would run for 5 years with a budget of 15 million yuan, which roughly translates to about $2.3 million. All of this might sound like it's a part of science fiction, but according to former NASA chief technologist Mason Peck, the idea isn't entirely off the wall, as the challenge here lies in the engineering side of things rather than the fundamental science behind such a massive rocket. I think it's entirely feasible, Peck, now a professor of aerospace engineering at Cornell University, told Live Science. I would describe the problems here not as insurmountable impediments, but rather problems of scale. The challenge for China still would be the huge price tag associated with building something as massive as this 800-meter rocket, along with the cost of launching such a rocket into space. To put things into perspective, the International Space Station, which is about 361 feet or 110 meters wide at its widest point, costs roughly about $100 billion to build. So constructing something 10 times larger would create a dent even in the most generous national space budget. Luckily, it also depends on what kind of structure China is planning to build. The ISS, for instance, is packed with so much equipment and is designed to accommodate humans, which will significantly increase its mass. If we are talking about something that's simply long and not so heavy, then the story might be entirely different, and maybe China could make this happen. The building techniques used by China will also reduce the cost of getting such a behemoth spaceship into space. The conventional way to build a rocket is to build components on Earth and assemble them like Legos in orbit, but 3D printing technology could change everything. Maybe China could even turn compact raw materials into structural components of larger dimensions in space and not on Earth. The other way to get this done would be by sourcing raw materials from the moon itself, which has low gravity compared to Earth, which means launching materials from its surface into space would be a lot easier for China. The good news is China already partnered up with Russia for a new lunar base that will be operational by 2036. The construction of this base will begin as early as 2026, and crews could start operating from the base by 2036. The station will be called International Lunar Research Station, which will rival the US Space Agency's plans to put humans permanently on the surface of the moon within a similar time frame. There is a hidden political agenda for China to partner up with Russia, the United States' greatest rival on Earth. So you know where this is going. The race to get to the moon between the United States and China is becoming increasingly competitive, and you need to consider that there are several private companies that are also competing to get to the moon and then to the red planet. So the next 2 years could determine who will win. According to NASA's top administrator Bill Nelson, a Chinese victory would result in the country claiming the ownership of vast swaths of moon. The former Florida senator and astronaut told the outlet, "It is a fact, we're in a space race. And it is true that we better watch out that they don't get to a place on the moon under the guise of scientific research. And it is not beyond the realm of possibility that they say, keep out, we're here. This is our territory." Keep in mind that such a structure with massive proportions will come with its own unique problems. When a spacecraft is subjected to external forces, the motion imparts energy to the spaceship's structure, which will cause it to vibrate and bend. So with a large structure, these vibrations will take a long time to subside. As a result, these spacecraft will require additional shock absorbers or active control to mitigate these vibrations. This means that designers will have to make careful trade-offs when deciding what altitude the spacecraft should orbit at, because at lower altitudes, drag from the outer atmosphere will slow down vehicles and they will need to constantly boost themselves back into a stable orbit. Such a similar issue that was noticed with the International Space Station. So for a larger structure like China's own rockets, which will have more drag acting on it, it would require more fuel to boost back into place, and that is a major concern. Launching something to higher altitudes is much more expensive, and radiation levels increase quickly the further from the Earth's atmosphere, which will be a problem if China wants humans in this spacecraft. So China needs to work a lot to build something as huge as this one. It's technically possible, but it's not feasible in the practical sense, at least with the technology that we have today. So now it's clear that China has big ambitions with this space station, as this station will have its own power, propulsion-like support system, and living quarters. It is designed to provide enough refueling power to China's new space telescope, which will be called the Assumption, which will fly close to the space station this year. China hopes that the Tiangong will replace the International Space Station, which will be decommissioned in 2031. Chinese astronauts are currently excluded from the International Space Station because the US law banned its space agency NASA from sharing their data with China, because of which China had zero presence in the International Space Station, even though this was a collaborative project. China's ambition does not end there. By 2030, the country is planning to have their first astronauts on the moon, and they're also planning to send probes to collect samples from Mars and even Jupiter. Yes, you heard it right, Jupiter. China does have a proper political motivation, just like every other country with their space programs, along with finding resources to fund their planned programs. So it looks like China's space programs are more driven by a desire to impress the rest of the world by projecting themselves as a superpower and also demonstrating their technological advancements.